Windmills. Symbols of a fading past. Symbols of people, their dreams and endeavors. To early settlers of Douglas County, water played an integral part of raising animals and growing crops. And Douglas County began, after all, as an agricultural area. There are only a few windmills left to remind us of our beginnings here. One of the most visible is known by many in the Highlands Ranch community. As a vestige of our past, it is a gateway to the early history of Highlands Ranch.
The earliest records that we've been able to find belong to a man named David Gregory, who had a homestead here in January of 1867. Another very early homesteader to this area was a man named Johann Welty, who came here in the 1870s, and by 1879 he and his brother-in-law had purchased some land in the future Highlands Ranch area. Upon this property they decided to establish a dairy ranch, and they called it the Big Dry Creek Cheese Ranch, which was named after a gulch that was nearby.
The windmill that we see standing today is believed to have been built in the 1890s by a man named John Wallace Springer, who began a legacy of horsemanship with his Pedigree Horse Ranch.
According to various sources, Springer came here in about 1898 and he purchased the land here, and he spent the next several years purchasing additional land that surrounded the property until he had accumulated what he called his Springer Cross Country Ranch. On this property, he raised prize-winning Oldenburg stallions, and he had mares that were imported from Germany. He was a very successful rancher, and the ranch received statewide and even national recognition and acclaim.
John Wallace Springer was a descendant of a very distinguished family. His father's ancestral line can be traced back to the Tsar and Grand Duchess of Russia, Alfred the Great, and even Charlemagne. Springer was well known as a lawyer in Illinois and as a major influence in the banking industry in Texas. He ran for Denver mayor in 1904 and was a vice presidential nominee for Theodore Roosevelt.
Unfortunately, we don't know too much about the actual construction process of Springer's portion of the mansion.
Following the death of his first wife in 1904, John Springer named his castle Isabel after his new bride.
He sold his cross-country horse and cattle ranch in 1913 to his first father-in-law, Colonel William Hughes. And Hughes renamed it Sunland Ranch, and he lived there until his death in 1918.
Colonel William Hughes was one of the founders of the City Bank of Dallas and president of the Continental Land and Cattle Company of St. Louis and Denver. In 1904, he became sole owner of Perry Park.
When he died, it passed to his granddaughter, Annie and Lafayette Hughes, and then they sold it to Waite Phillips. Waite Phillips was an oil producer in Oklahoma, and his brothers were the founders of the Phillips Petroleum Company.
Being an industrious and generous man, he donated his Philmont Ranch in New Mexico to the Boy Scouts of America. The donation of his villa in Tulsa became the Philbrook Art Center. Other business interests included the development of the Phil Tower and Phil Cade buildings in Tulsa.
And he lived here until about 1926 when he sold it to Frank Kistler. Frank Kistler was the president of the Woolhurst Stock Farm, so he also had a ranching background. And he renamed the property Diamond Cave Ranch. And you can see this engraved on the mantle of the fireplace that he had built in the great room of the mansion. In 1929, Frank Kistler invited the Arapahoe Hunt Club to move their headquarters from the Denver Country Club to the hills of the Diamond Cave Ranch. The Arapahoe Hunt Club was a very prestigious group of horsebacked hunters who hunted coyotes as opposed to the English tradition of foxes. And they were aided by a very eager band of bloodhounds. They just gathered for the love of the chase. There was no actual capturing of the animals. The head of this club was a man named Lawrence Phipps Jr., and he was the man who stepped in and purchased the property from Kistler in 1937. Kistler was having some financial problems from the Depression and couldn't keep the property anymore. Phipps purchased the whole thing for a reported $250,000.
The family name is linked with Phipps Auditorium in Denver, as well as the Broncos and Bears sports teams. L.C. Phipps Jr. was a founder and director of early electric and telephone companies. For decades, Phipps was master of hunt at the Arapahoe Hunt Club.
Phipps lived here until his death in 1976. He died in the library of the mansion. His heirs sold it in 1977 to a man named Marvin Davis, who in turn sold it, and the modern community of Highlands Ranch was created. This is where our history is. It's a very unique history that fits into Colorado very well. This was where the home of some of Colorado's most renowned millionaires were. This is where our roots are. This was the original ranch. This is where it all started.